It started innocently enough, or at least that's what I told myself. Rebecca had always been busy, juggling her demanding career as a corporate attorney with her endless list of hobbies and social commitments. I admired her energy and independence, but over the past few months, something had changed. She was working later, her excuses more frequent and less believable. She spent more time on her phone, always careful to shield the screen when I walked by. I wanted to believe there was a reasonable explanation, but the doubt gnawed at me like a splinter I couldn't remove. The tipping point came one Friday evening. Rebecca had texted me that she'd be home late from work again, claiming an emergency meeting with a client. I believed her, until I saw her Instagram story. It was a simple photo, barely worth noticing, a half-empty glass of red wine on a bar counter, accompanied by a caption that read, "Finally some me time." I stared at it, my chest tightening. She wasn't at the office. She was at a bar, relaxing. Alone? With someone else? The doubt swelled into something darker, and for the first time in our marriage, I considered the unthinkable. The next day, I confided in my friend Ryan over coffee. "I don't want to jump to conclusions," I said, my hands gripping the cup tightly. "But I can't shake the feeling that something's going on." Ryan leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "Have you asked her about it?" I shook my head. "I don't want to accuse her without proof." "What if I'm wrong?" Ryan hesitated before replying. "Then maybe it's time to get some answers. If you can't talk to her, there's another option." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "I know a guy," Ryan said, lowering his voice. "A private investigator. Discreet, professional. If something's going on, he'll find out." The idea felt like crossing a line, but the weight of my suspicions tipped the scales. "Give me his number," I said reluctantly. That evening, I called the detective. His name was Mark Sullivan, a gruff-voiced man who spoke with the efficiency of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. "Tell me what you need," he said. I hesitated, the words sticking in my throat. Finally, I forced them out. "I think my wife might be hiding something from me." "I need to know what?" Mark asked a few more questions, Rebecca's schedule, her habits, her usual haunts. I gave him what I could, feeling equal parts guilty and desperate. "I'll start tomorrow," Mark said. "You'll have answers soon." As I hung up, a chill ran through me. I had crossed the line, and there was no going back. For the next week, I heard little from Mark. He sent occasional updates, a photo of Rebecca leaving her office late at night, a snapshot of her at lunch with a colleague. Nothing incriminating, but nothing that eased my mind either. Then, on Friday, Mark called. "I have something," he said, his tone unreadable. "Meet me at my office tomorrow." My stomach churned as I agreed. Mark's office was tucked away on the second floor of a nondescript building downtown. The walls were lined with filing cabinets and old case photos, the air thick with the scent of stale coffee. Mark gestured for me to sit, then slid a manila folder across the desk. Inside were photos of Rebecca. The first few were innocuous: Rebecca at the grocery store, Rebecca heading to the gym. But then, my breath caught. One photo showed her at the same bar from the Instagram story, sitting across from a man I didn't recognize. They were laughing, their body language easy, familiar. "Who is he?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "His name's Eric," Mark said. "Financial consultant." I did some digging. "They've met up 3 times in the past month." I stared at the photo, my mind racing. "Do you think she's cheating?" Mark hesitated. "It's hard to say. They could just be friends. But I'd be lying if I said it didn't look suspicious." My hands clenched into fists as a storm of emotions swirled inside me. Anger. Hurt. Confusion. "Keep digging," I said finally. I need to know for sure. Mark nodded. I'll be in touch. That night, I couldn't bring myself to look at Rebecca. She came home late again, her smile bright but her eyes distant. How was work? I asked, my voice strained. Exhausting, she said, brushing past me to the kitchen. I'm going to bed early. I watched her go, my chest heavy with unspoken words. What was she hiding? And more importantly, was I ready to find out? The days that followed were a blur of waiting and overthinking. Every time Rebecca left the house, I felt my stomach churn with uncertainty. Mark Sullivan had promised to keep me updated, but the silence was unbearable. Rebecca, meanwhile, seemed completely at ease. If she noticed my tension, she didn't show it. She went about her days as though nothing was wrong, cooking dinner, talking about her latest projects at work, even suggesting a weekend getaway. I couldn't tell if her behavior was proof of innocence or the mark of someone well-practiced in deception. Mark finally called me on Wednesday afternoon. I've got something, he said, his tone cautious. It's not definitive, but it's strange. You'll want to see it. We arranged to meet that evening. When I arrived at Mark's office, he wasted no time. He handed me a new folder, this one thinner than the last. The first photo showed Rebecca leaving her office building, her phone pressed to her ear. She looked distracted, her face tense. This was Monday night, Mark explained. She left the office around 7 p.m. and headed to a restaurant downtown. That's where things got interesting. He flipped to the next photo. It showed Rebecca seated at a small corner table in a dimly lit restaurant. Across from her was Eric, the same man from the bar. My chest tightened, but Mark raised a hand to stop me from speaking. Hold on. It gets weirder. The next photo showed Eric leaving the restaurant alone. Rebecca stayed behind, her face partially obscured by her hand. She sat there for another 20 minutes, Mark said. When she left, she didn't go home. What do you mean? I asked, my voice strained. Mark slid the final photo across the desk. It showed Rebecca entering a small building with no signage, its windows dark and shuttered. This place, Mark said, tapping the photo, is registered to a shell company. No obvious ties to Rebecca or Eric. I checked the building's activity, it's been mostly empty for years. Whatever's going on in there, it's not above board. I stared at the photo, my heart pounding. Did you go inside? Mark shook his head. Too risky. But I can if you want. I hesitated, torn between wanting answers and fearing what those answers might reveal. Do it, I said finally. Find out what's in there. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, replaying the images in my mind, Rebecca with Eric, Rebecca entering the mysterious building. When she finally came to bed, I pretended to be asleep. I could feel her next to me, her breathing steady, her presence warm. But the distance between us felt insurmountable. The next morning, I received a text from Mark. Mark, met someone at the building. Gave me something to think about. Need to talk in person. We arranged to meet that afternoon at a cafe near my office. When I arrived, Mark was already there, nursing a cup of black coffee. His expression was grim. What did you find? I asked, sitting across from him. Mark slid a small flash drive across the table. Security footage from inside the building, he said. I managed to talk to the property manager. He's been suspicious of the activity there, and he let me copy a few hours of video. What's on it? Mark hesitated. That's the thing. It's Rebecca, meeting with people I don't recognize. It's not Eric, and it's not anyone I've seen her with before. They're carrying briefcases, exchanging what looks like documents. Documents? I asked, frowning. Contracts, maybe. Or financial records. Whatever it is, It's serious. She's not just sneaking around, Daniel, she's involved in something. My mind raced, jumping from one theory to the next. Was it criminal? Was Eric a client, or something more? Mark leaned forward, lowering his voice. I'll be honest with you, I've done a lot of these cases, and this doesn't look like an affair. It looks like business. Business? I repeated, confused. He nodded. But not the kind of business that's on the books. This feels off. Like she's working for someone, or against someone. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Rebecca wasn't just lying, she was living a double life. What do I do now? I asked, my voice hollow. Mark's expression softened. That depends. Do you want the whole truth, no matter what it is? I swallowed hard, the weight of the question pressing down on me. Yes, I said finally. I need to know everything. Mark nodded. Then I'll keep digging. That evening, I stared at the flash drive on my desk, debating whether to watch the footage. Part of me wanted to know what Rebecca was doing in that building, but another part feared what I might see. In the end, curiosity won. I plugged the drive into my laptop and opened the video files. The footage was grainy but clear enough to see Rebecca. She was sitting at a table in the middle of a large, empty room, facing two men in suits. They exchanged papers, gesturing and speaking animatedly. At one point, Rebecca leaned forward, her expression tense as she pointed to something on the documents. It didn't look like a casual meeting. It looked like negotiation. As the video ended, one question echoed in my mind. What had my wife gotten herself into? The footage from the flash drive lingered in my mind long after I closed my laptop. Rebecca wasn't meeting Eric for drinks, and she wasn't sneaking around behind my back in the way I'd feared. This was bigger, more calculated. But it raised even more questions than it answered. Who were those men? What was in the documents? And what role did Rebecca play in all of this? By the time she came home that evening, I was sitting at the dining table, trying to look casual despite the storm of thoughts racing through me. Hey, she said, hanging her coat by the door. You're home early. I forced a smile. Yeah, slow day at work. Thought I'd make dinner. Her face lit up, and for a moment, I felt the familiar warmth of the woman I married. But that warmth only deepened my guilt. Smells amazing, she said, peeking into the kitchen. What's the occasion? No occasion, I said, shrugging. Just thought it'd be nice. We ate together, chatting about her day. She told me about a client presentation and a difficult colleague, her stories as smooth and rehearsed as always. But now, I couldn't help but wonder how much of it was real. That night, after Rebecca fell asleep, I called Mark. I need to know more about those men she met with, I said, keeping my voice low. I'm already on it, Mark replied. I ran facial recognition on the footage. One of them is a guy named Alan Briggs, a mid-level broker with ties to offshore accounts. The other, well, that's where it gets interesting. What do you mean? I asked. His name's Mason Crowley, Mark said. And he's not just anyone. He's a government contractor specializing in cybersecurity. Works with sensitive data, encryption, the works. I froze. Why would Rebecca be meeting with someone like that? That's the million-dollar question, Mark replied. But it's not a coincidence. Crowley's got a spotless record, no scandals, no controversies. If he's meeting with her, it's for a reason. What do we do now? Mark paused. I think it's time to dig into Rebecca's financials. If she's connected to these guys, there'll be a paper trail. I hesitated. Going through her financial records felt like another betrayal. But then again, hadn't she already betrayed me? Do it, I said finally. The next morning, I couldn't shake the feeling that Rebecca was watching me more closely than usual. "You okay?" she asked as I poured myself a second cup of coffee. "Yeah," I said quickly. "Why?" "You seem distracted," she replied, tilting her head. I forced a laugh. "Just work stuff." She nodded but didn't look convinced. Later that day, Mark called with another update. "I went through her bank records," he said. "It's not what I expected." "What do you mean?" "She's not funneling money into offshore accounts, if that's what you were worried about," Mark explained. "But there are regular deposits into an account registered under a different name, Anna Hughes." "Who's Anna Hughes?" I asked, frowning. "That's the thing," Mark said. "Anna Hughes doesn't exist. The account is fake, but Rebecca's been using it to move money, large sums, over the past 6 months." "Large sums?" "6 figures," Mark said grimly. I sank into my chair, my mind reeling. "Where's the money going?" "That's the strange part," Mark said. "It's not going anywhere. It's just sitting there, untouched." I didn't know what to make of it. Rebecca had created a fake account, funneled hundreds of thousands of dollars into it, and then done nothing? Any idea why she'd do that? I asked. Mark hesitated. "Not yet. But I did find something else. You're not going to like it." I gripped the phone tighter. "What is it?" "There's a payment from that account," Mark said. "To Eric. It's small, but it's there." I felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. Why would she be paying him? "That's what we need to find out," Mark said. "It could mean a lot of things. But it doesn't look good," I finished for him. Mark didn't respond, and the silence was answer enough. That evening, I decided to confront Rebecca, carefully. As we sat down for dinner, I kept my tone light. "Hey, I've been meaning to ask. How's Eric doing? Haven't heard you mention him in a while." Rebecca froze for a split second, her fork hovering midair. Then she smiled, too quickly. "Oh, he's fine." "Why?" "No reason," I said, watching her carefully. "I just remembered you mentioning him before." She nodded, taking another bite. "Yeah, we've worked on a few things together. He's great at what he does." Her response was smooth, but the flicker of tension in her expression told me everything I needed to know. She was hiding something. And I wasn't going to stop until I uncovered it. The tension between Rebecca and me grew heavier over the next few days. She must have sensed my unease because she seemed more attentive than usual, asking about my day, cooking dinner, even suggesting we go to the movies like we used to. But I knew better. Her gestures, as kind as they seemed, felt like distractions. The more I watched her, the more I noticed the cracks. Her phone calls were shorter, her explanations vaguer. And then there was Eric. Mark's discovery of the payment from the fake account to Eric had thrown everything into question. If Rebecca wasn't having an affair with him, what was he to her? And why was she sending him money under a false name? I needed answers. Mark called me late one night, his voice low and urgent. "I have something new," he said. "Eric's not just a financial consultant. He's involved in something bigger." My heart pounded. "What do you mean?" "I found his connection to Mason Crowley," Mark said. "Eric isn't just some guy Rebecca happens to know, he's part of Crowley's operation. He's been flagged in several investigations, though nothing's stuck. Whatever they're doing, it's carefully hidden." The walls felt like they were closing in. "And Rebecca?" "She's not on any official radar," Mark replied. "But if she's working with Eric and Crowley, it's only a matter of time." "What are they working on?" I asked. "That's the thing," Mark said. "I don't have a full picture yet, but it's not small-time stuff. Crowley deals in cybersecurity and encrypted information. He doesn't meet with people unless they have something valuable to offer? Valuable. That word stuck in my mind as I hung up. What could Rebecca possibly have that was valuable enough to bring her into the orbit of someone like Mason Crowley? The following day, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I told Rebecca I was working late, but instead, I drove to Eric's office building. It was a sleek, modern structure downtown, with glass windows that reflected the city skyline. I parked across the street and waited. Around 7 p.m., Eric emerged, carrying a briefcase and looking preoccupied. I followed him on foot, keeping my distance as he made his way through the busy streets. He stopped at a cafe, ordered a coffee, and sat down at a corner table. I waited, watching as he pulled out his laptop and began typing. After 20 minutes, I couldn't take it anymore. I walked inside, ordered a drink, and casually approached his table. "Eric, right?" I said, forcing a friendly smile. He looked up, startled. "Yeah, do I know you?" I sat down before he could object. "Not exactly. I'm Rebecca's husband." His expression froze, and for a moment, I thought he might get up and leave. But then he forced a smile. "Oh. Right. She's mentioned you." "Has she?" I asked, leaning back in my chair. "Because she hasn't mentioned you much lately." Eric shifted uncomfortably, his hands tightening around his coffee cup. "Look, I'm not sure what you're getting at." "I'm getting at the fact that my wife has been paying you," I interrupted. "From a fake account." "Care to explain that?" His face turned pale, and he glanced around nervously. "I think you're misunderstanding." "Cut the crap," I snapped, my voice low but firm. "I know about Crowley. I know about the meetings. I want the truth." Eric hesitated, then sighed, leaning forward. "Fine. But if I tell you, it doesn't leave this table." I nodded, my heart racing. "Rebecca's working with us because she has access to something we need," Eric said. "Legal documents, sensitive information from her firm's clients. It's not illegal, not exactly. But it's valuable." I felt a chill run down my spine. "She's giving you confidential information?" "Not directly," Eric said quickly. "She finds loopholes, ways to share data without breaking any laws. It's complicated." I clenched my fists under the table. "And the money? Why is she paying you?" Eric hesitated. "Because I'm the middleman. Crowley doesn't deal with people like Rebecca directly. I make sure everything runs smoothly." I stared at him, a mix of anger and disbelief churning inside me. Does she know who she's dealing with? What Crowley's capable of? Eric shrugged. "She's smart. Smarter than most of the people I work with. But if you're worried about her safety..." He trailed off, his gaze dropping to the table. "What?" I pressed. Eric looked up, his expression grim. "Let's just say Crowley isn't someone you want to cross. If Rebecca messes up, or tries to back out, it won't end well." When I got home that night, Rebecca was already asleep. I stood in the doorway, watching her, my chest tight with a mix of anger, fear, and heartbreak. She had lied to me, hidden things from me, put herself in danger, all for reasons I still didn't fully understand. I wanted to shake her awake, demand answers. But I didn't. Instead, I walked downstairs, poured myself a drink, and stared at the folder Mark had given me. The pieces were coming together, but one question remained. Was Rebecca trying to help someone, or was she in it for herself? I woke early the next morning, my mind still racing from the revelations of the night before. Rebecca was in over her head, entangled in something far more dangerous than I'd imagined. The question was, had she knowingly stepped into this web, or had someone pulled her in? When I came downstairs, Rebecca was already in the kitchen, sipping coffee and scrolling through her phone. She looked up and smiled, the image of a woman with nothing to hide. "Morning," she said brightly. "You're up early." I forced a smile. "Couldn't sleep." She tilted her head, her expression softening. "Is everything okay? You've seemed off lately." I hesitated, the urge to confront her bubbling up inside me. But something stopped me. If she was lying to me, if she'd been lying for months, how could I trust anything she said? "I'm fine," I said finally. "Just work stress." She nodded, accepting the excuse without question. But as I watched her pour another cup of coffee, I knew one thing for certain: I couldn't let this go. I called Mark later that morning. "Eric gave me some answers," I said, pacing the living room. "But there's still a lot I don't understand." "What did he tell you?" Mark asked. I recapped the conversation, Rebecca's role, the legal loopholes, Crowley's involvement. Mark listened quietly, then said, "If what Eric told you is true, Rebecca's walking a very fine line. She might think she's in control, but with someone like Crowley, control is an illusion." "I need to know more," I said, my voice firm. "I need to know if she's doing this willingly or if she's being manipulated." Mark sighed. "There's one more lead I can follow. Crowley keeps a private office downtown. It's a front, but I've heard it's where he handles sensitive matters. If Rebecca's working with him, there might be something there." "Can you get in?" I asked. "I can try," Mark replied. "But it's risky. If Crowley finds out someone's poking around, things could get ugly." I hesitated, weighing the risks. "Do it. Whatever it takes." 2 days later, Mark called with an update. "I got into Crowley's office," he said, his voice tense. "And you're not going to like what I found." "What is it?" I asked, bracing myself. "There's a file on Rebecca," Mark said. "A detailed one. It includes her work history, financial records, even personal notes, things only someone close to her would know." My stomach twisted. "What kind of notes?" Mark hesitated. "Things about her marriage. About you." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. "What does Crowley want with me?" "That's the thing," Mark said. "I don't think he wants you. I think he's using you to control Rebecca. If she knows he has this file, she'll do whatever he asks to keep you safe." I sank into the couch, the weight of Mark's words pressing down on me. Rebecca wasn't just hiding things from me, she was protecting me. But at what cost? That evening, I confronted Rebecca. When she walked through the door, I was waiting for her in the living room, the folder Mark had given me sitting on the coffee table. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady but firm. Rebecca froze, her eyes flicking to the folder. "What's that?" "You tell me," I said, crossing my arms. She hesitated, then walked over and sat down, her shoulders tense. "Daniel, I can explain." "Then start explaining," I interrupted. "I know about Eric. I know about Crowley. I know about the fake account. What I don't know is why you've been lying to me." Rebecca's face paled, and for a moment, she looked like she might deny everything. But then she sighed, her shoulders slumping. "I didn't want you to find out like this," she said quietly. "Find out what?" I pressed. Rebecca looked up at me, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I didn't do this for me, Daniel. I did it for us. For us." I repeated, disbelief lacing my voice. "How is getting involved with Crowley and Eric for us?" She hesitated, then said, "Crowley approached me months ago. He knew things, about my job, about my clients. He said if I didn't help him, he'd expose me. But it wasn't just about me. He threatened to go after you." My chest tightened. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I couldn't risk it," she said, her voice breaking. I thought if I kept him happy, he'd leave us alone. But then it got bigger, he wanted more, and I couldn't say no without putting you in danger." Her words hung in the air, and for the first time, I saw the fear she'd been hiding. "Rebecca," I said, my voice softening. "We could have faced this together." She shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I didn't want you to get hurt." I reached for her hand, and she gripped it tightly, her fingers trembling. "Then let's end this," I said. "Together." Rebecca hesitated, then nodded. "There's something I haven't told you. Crowley's expecting me to deliver something tomorrow, something I don't have." "What happens if you don't deliver?" I asked. Her voice was barely a whisper. "He'll come for us." My mind raced as I tried to come up with a plan. If Crowley thought he could control Rebecca, he was wrong. "Then we'll give him what he wants," I said. "But on our terms." Rebecca frowned. "What do you mean?" I met her gaze, determination hardening my voice. "We turn the tables. We make him think he's won. And then we take him down." Her eyes widened, a mix of hope and fear flickering in them. "Can we really do that?" I nodded, gripping her hand tighter. "We have to." The next day arrived with a weight that settled in my chest the moment I woke up. Rebecca and I had spent the night piecing together a plan, one that would keep us safe while dismantling Crowley's hold over her. It wasn't foolproof, but it was the only chance we had. Crowley wanted Rebecca to deliver sensitive client information to him at an upscale hotel downtown. The data didn't exist. It was a fabricated demand meant to keep her in line. If Rebecca showed up empty-handed, we knew he wouldn't let her leave unscathed. But we weren't going to give him the chance. By noon, Rebecca was dressed and ready to leave. She wore a tailored black suit, her expression a mask of calm confidence. But as she slipped on her heels, I noticed her hands trembling. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, glancing at me. I nodded, handing her the flash drive Mark had prepared. It contained a dummy file, enough to stall Crowley but not enough to expose any real data. "We stick to the plan," I said. "Mark will be watching from the lobby. I'll be nearby. The moment Crowley takes the drive, we move." Rebecca nodded, taking a deep breath. As she walked out the door, I whispered, "Be careful." She looked back, her eyes softening. "You too." I arrived at the hotel 20 minutes after Rebecca. The lobby was buzzing with activity, business people rushing to meetings, tourists snapping photos. Amid the crowd, Mark sat in an armchair near the elevators, his laptop open and his gaze sharp. "She's on the 12th floor," he said when I approached. "Crowley's with her." "So far, no signs of trouble." I nodded, my pulse quickening. "And his men?" "Two in the hallway, near the room. Armed." My stomach twisted, but I forced myself to stay focused. "What's the timeline?" Mark glanced at his laptop. "We give her 10 minutes to hand over the drive. Once she leaves the room, we make our move." "And the police?" I asked. "They're staged 2 blocks away," Mark said. "We'll call them once we have evidence of a threat. Until then, it's on us." I exhaled slowly, the weight of the moment pressing down on me. Upstairs, Rebecca sat across from Crowley in a lavish suite. The room was pristine, the skyline visible through floor-to-ceiling windows. Crowley leaned back in his chair, his sharp features illuminated by the midday sun. He held the flash drive between his fingers, turning it over as if inspecting it for flaws. "This is everything?" he asked, his tone calm but laced with menace. Rebecca nodded, keeping her voice steady. "It's all there." Crowley's lips curved into a faint smile. "Good. You've done well, Rebecca. I'll make sure this is put to good use." She swallowed hard, resisting the urge to look at the door. "Am I free to go now?" Crowley chuckled softly. You're free when I say you are. He gestured to one of his men, who took the drive and inserted it into a laptop. The screen lit up with files, all carefully crafted by Mark to mimic legitimate client data. Crowley leaned forward, studying the screen intently. For a moment, Rebecca thought he might fall for it. But then his expression darkened. "This isn't right," he muttered, his eyes narrowing. Rebecca's pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" Crowley turned to her, his voice cold. "This data's been tampered with. You think I wouldn't notice?" Rebecca's mind raced, but before she could respond, Crowley stood abruptly. "You've been playing games," he said, his tone venomous. "And now you're going to regret it." Downstairs, Mark's phone buzzed. "She's in trouble," he said, his voice urgent. I didn't wait for details. I bolted for the elevator, my heart pounding as I punched the button for the 12th floor. When the doors opened, I stepped into the hallway and froze. Crowley's 2 men were standing outside the suite, their hands resting on their concealed weapons. Forcing myself to stay calm, I pulled out my phone and pretended to check it as I walked past them. From inside the room, I heard Crowley's voice, sharp and angry. "You have 10 seconds to explain yourself," he said. I positioned myself near the door, waiting for the right moment. Inside, Rebecca's mind raced as Crowley's threat hung in the air. "Do you really think I'd come here without a backup plan?" she said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. Crowley raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Backup plan?" Rebecca reached into her bag and pulled out a small device. She pressed a button, and a sharp beep filled the air. "That's a tracker," she said. "The police already know where we are. If I don't walk out of here in 5 minutes, they'll come for you." Crowley's eyes narrowed, his expression unreadable. Outside, I took a deep breath and knocked on the door. The 2 guards turned to me, their hands inching toward their weapons. "What do you want?" one of them growled. "I think I'm in the wrong place," I said, holding up my phone. "My friend said she was in room 1207, but..." Before they could respond, the elevator doors opened, and Mark stepped out with 2 uniformed police officers. The guards froze, their hands lifting in surrender as the officers drew their weapons. Inside the suite, Crowley glanced toward the door, realizing too late that he'd been outmaneuvered. Rebecca stood, her voice calm but firm. "It's over, Crowley." The door burst open, and the officers stormed in, pinning Crowley and his men against the wall. An hour later, Rebecca and I sat in a small cafe, the adrenaline still coursing through our veins. "It's done," I said, squeezing her hand. She nodded, her eyes distant. "But at what cost?" I didn't have an answer. The danger was over, but the scars it left behind would take time to heal. As we sat there, watching the world move on around us, I realized something. The truth wasn't just about uncovering what Rebecca had hidden, it was about rediscovering who we were together. And for the first time in months, I felt like we had a chance.